Remember what I told you, right?
Yeah,
What I said?
skull man business.
What started as talk about a Versus battle didn't just fall apart, it detonated. This wasn't just two rap legends trading slick comments. This turned into a digital war that pulled in wives, sons, childhood trauma, and AI-generated mind games. And once the lines were crossed, there was no going back. When 50 Cent and T.I couldn't see eye to eye over respect, the tension simmered quietly in the background. But the moment family got involved, everything changed. A single Instagram post lit the fuse. A son stepped into a grown man's battlefield. Words turned nuclear, and the internet watched it all unfold in real time. This wasn't just about music anymore. It became about ego, legacy, pride, and who controls the narrative in the social media era. Memes versus emotion, strategy versus rage, old school calculated warfare versus new school livestream energy. By the time AI edits and diss tracks entered the chat, this wasn't entertainment, it was personal. And once it got personal, there was no such thing as just rap anymore. Let's break down how this escalated step by step. What started this entire situation wasn't disrespect. It wasn't family. It wasn't even social media. It started with a conversation about a stage. For years, fans had debated what would happen if 50 Cent and T.I ever faced off in a Versus battle. During the pandemic era, Versus wasn't just a live stream series. It was a cultural moment. Legendary catalogs went head-to-head. Bragging rights were on the line. And for a while, the idea of 50 versus Tip felt inevitable. According to T.I, this wasn't just fan fiction. He claimed the two of them actually discussed it in person, while both were in Los Angeles working on television projects. The way Tip tells it, the plan was simple. He would go public first. He would spark the buzz. Then 50 would follow up and confirm. Clean, strategic, no confusion. But when T.I stepped out and started talking about it publicly, he says 50 switched up, acted like no real conversation had happened, played it off like it was just talk. Now in hip-hop, declining a battle isn't the issue. Saying I'm not interested is fair, but what T.I took personally wasn't the refusal. It was what he perceived as a lack of transparency. To him, it wasn't about music anymore. It was about character. And then he said the words that changed everything. He publicly stated he didn't respect 50 Cent. That sentence may not sound explosive to the average person, but when you understand 50's history, you realize that was gasoline on dry grass. 50 Cent's entire career has been built on confrontation. From early industry rivalries to high-profile feuds, his blueprint has always been the same. If you say something slick, he responds, and he escalates. He doesn't just clap back. He applies pressure. He studies weaknesses. He turns moments into narratives. And most importantly, he never lets disrespect breathe. So when T.I questioned his character publicly, there was no scenario where 50 was going to ignore it. But here's where things take a turn. Instead of responding with a traditional diss record, 50 went to Instagram. And that's important. Because modern rap beef doesn't live in studios first, it lives online. The battlefield is digital. The audience is instant. The reactions are immediate. 50 told T.I to keep his name out of his mouth. Subtle warning, direct message. At that point, this could have stayed competitive. Two veteran rappers, two massive catalogs, pride on the line. But then 50 made a move that shifted the temperature completely. He posted an unflattering performance photo of Tamika Tiny Harris, T.I.'s wife. Now understand something. Tiny isn't just someone's wife. She's a Grammy-winning artist, a member of the legendary R&B group Xscape. She has her own legacy separate from her husband, which is exactly why this hit different. The image was clearly meant to embarrass. The caption reinforced the warning, "Keep my name out your mouth." In hip-hop culture, there has always been an unspoken code. You can attack bars. You can attack street credibility. You can attack business moves. But bringing someone's spouse into it, that crosses into personal territory. And 50 knows that. This wasn't random. It was calculated. It was designed to provoke an emotional response. Because when emotions enter the equation, strategy often leaves. And that's exactly what happened next. Enter King Harris. T.I. and Tiny's son. King grew up in the spotlight, reality television, public scrutiny, social media culture. He's not unfamiliar with controversy. But this was different. This was about his mother. Instead of sitting back, instead of letting his father handle it, King went live. No script, no filter, pure emotion. He defended his mother aggressively. And then he went somewhere nobody expected. He targeted 50's deepest wound, his late mother, Sabrina Jackson, who passed away when 50 was just a child. In rap beef, there are lines mentioning someone's deceased parent. That's nuclear. King didn't just mention it. He leaned into it. He posted imagery. He used language that many people felt went too far. And within hours, the internet exploded. Clips circulated everywhere. Millions of views, comment sections divided. Some people applauded King for standing up for his mother. Others felt he crossed a moral boundary that should never be touched. What's fascinating here is the generational contrast. King's response was raw, emotional, immediate. That's how younger creators often operate online. Direct, unfiltered, explosive. But 50? He didn't go live yelling. He didn't post paragraphs. He dropped a meme. Just a laughing image. Minimal words, maximum message. That contrast changed perception. One side looked heated, the other looked controlled. And in the digital age, control often reads as power, but 50 wasn't done. Because when he decides to respond, he rarely does it in just one layer. This wasn't just about winning an argument, it was about narrative dominance. And what he did next, using artificial intelligence to flip a scene from the 2006 film ATL, showed that this wasn't an emotional reaction. It was psychological warfare. But before we even get there, you have to understand something crucial. This beef stopped being about music the moment family entered the picture. Once wives and mothers are involved, the temperature doesn't just rise, and it explodes. And now, instead of two rap veterans debating catalogs, we had a son in the middle of a grown man's battle, and millions of people watching it unfold in real time. This wasn't just another rap feud. This was ego versus ego, emotion versus strategy, old school calculated trolling versus new school live stream fury. And we're only at the beginning. When King went live, the internet saw emotion. When 50 responded, the internet saw control. And in modern conflict, perception is everything. After King Harris unleashed his rant, mentioning 50's late mother and pushing the situation into deeply personal territory, most people expected an explosive reaction. They expected anger, a long caption, maybe even a diss track. That's not what happened. Instead, 50 Cent did what he has mastered for over 2 decades. He minimized his opponent publicly while maximizing the spectacle. First came the meme. No long explanation, no emotional energy, just a subtle, almost dismissive post, a laugh, a shrug. The message was clear without being spelled out. You're not on my level. That response alone shifted momentum, because when one person is yelling and the other is smirking, the crowd often reads the smirk as dominance. But 50 wasn't finished. He escalated, not with volume, but with creativity. He posted an AI-edited clip from the 2006 film ATL, a movie that originally starred T.I. himself. In the edited version, 50's face was digitally placed into a scene confronting a younger character. The key line, "Grown man business," 4 words. But those 4 words carried layers. It was a warning to King Harris. This is between adults. It was a subtle jab at T.I., control your house. And it was a public framing device, 50 positioning himself as the calm, seasoned veteran while portraying King as emotional and out of his depth. That's psychological framing, and 50 understands it better than most. The internet lit up again. Some called it genius trolling, others called it unsettling. The use of AI in a personal beef added a futuristic edge that made the situation feel even more calculated. But the important thing wasn't whether people approved. The important thing was that everyone was talking. And when it comes to 50 Cent, attention is currency. Meanwhile, King Harris wasn't backing down. Instead of cooling off, he doubled down. He began resurfacing old controversies from 50's past. Court clips, headlines, Moments that had already lived in public memory. He reposted and reframed them as evidence. It wasn't just ranting anymore. It was an attempt to build a case in the court of public opinion. This marked a shift. King moved from emotional defense into aggressive offense. But here's where things became uncomfortable for many observers. He extended his attacks beyond 50 himself and began referencing 50's younger son. That's when even some supporters started stepping back. Because once children are pulled into public ridicule, the audience changes its tone. There's a difference between two artists exchanging shots and minors being mentioned. And that's when the broader cultural conversation began. This wasn't just about who won, it became about boundaries. What is fair in modern rap beef? Is there still an unspoken code? Or has social media erased those lines entirely? Historically, hip-hop has always had tension. Competition fuels creativity. Diss records sharpen skills. But traditionally, family members who weren't involved stayed outside the ring. In this situation, both sides crossed lines, just in different ways. 50 initiated by bringing T.I.'s wife into the spotlight with an embarrassing image. King retaliated by weaponizing childhood trauma and eventually referencing 50's son. One move triggered the next. Reaction triggered reaction. That's escalation psychology. Once someone feels personally attacked, they rarely respond proportionally. They respond emotionally. And emotional responses tend to overshoot. And that's what we saw play out in real time. What makes this conflict especially interesting is the generational contrast. 50 is from an era where public persona is tightly managed. Interviews were controlled. Moves were strategic. Even diss tracks had rollout plans. King grew up in the livestream era. Immediate reaction is normalized. Emotional transparency is common. Social media rewards intensity. So when the clash happened, it wasn't just personal, it was generational. Calculated versus reactive. Chess versus blitz. Another layer here is legacy. Both 50 Cent and T.I. built reputations as dominant forces in their primes. Their catalogs speak for themselves. Their influence is cemented. But when legacy feels challenged, especially publicly, pride becomes a factor. When T.I. said he didn't respect 50, that wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge to legacy. When 50 posted Tiny's image, that wasn't random trolling. It was a message. I can disrupt your space. And when King jumped in, it wasn't just about rap. It was about family loyalty. This is where the emotional weight intensified. A son defending his mother will always resonate with certain audiences. Loyalty is powerful, but loyalty expressed without restraint can blur lines quickly. And in the middle of all this, T.I. stepped back into the musical arena. He dropped a diss track titled War. Unlike the social media exchanges, this was traditional hip-hop response. Bars, delivery, direct lyrical targeting. For many fans, that felt familiar, comfortable, structured. It reminded people that beneath the chaos, these are artists. But here's the twist. The music wasn't driving the narrative anymore. The posts were, the memes were, the AI clip was, the live stream rant was. The internet had become the primary stage. And in that environment, 50's skill set shines. He understands algorithms. He understands virality. He knows that sometimes a meme travels further than a verse. Meanwhile, King's approach generated shock value. But shock has a shorter lifespan. It burns hot and fast. This is where strategic patience becomes powerful. While King posted frequently, 50 spaced out his responses. Each one felt deliberate, minimal, controlled. That contrast influenced public perception over time. People began asking, is this about winning a rap battle or winning attention? Because in 2026, those aren't always the same thing. Another dimension to consider is emotional discipline. When someone appears unbothered, it unsettles the opponent. When someone appears furious, it can signal vulnerability. Whether 50 was truly unbothered is irrelevant. What matters is that he appeared that way. Image management is everything, and by maintaining composure publicly, he forced King to carry the emotional weight of the conflict. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if one side wins the narrative, everyone loses something when families become ammunition. Public memory is long. Screenshots don't disappear. And moments that feel justified in anger can echo for years. By this point in the timeline, the original topic, a potential versus battle, felt almost distant. What began as competitive tension had transformed into a layered digital war involving pride, generational identity, trauma, and strategy. And the audience, they weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. And once the public divides, the conflict gains a life of its own. At this stage, there was only one question left. Would this return to music, or had it permanently crossed into something darker than rap? Because when someone says, this is grown man business, it can mean two very different things. It can mean, handle it maturely, or it can mean, this is no longer entertainment. By the time this conflict reached its peak, nobody was talking about a versus battle anymore. The music had become background noise. What people were watching now was something much bigger, a public clash of ego, legacy, pride, and generational identity. After the AI-edited clip from ATL circulated and King Harris continued firing back online, the situation reached a boiling point. It wasn't just fans debating anymore. Media outlets were dissecting every post. Reaction channels were analyzing tone, body language, captions, everything. And right in the center of it all stood three names: 50 Cent, T.I, and King Harris. But this final phase wasn't about who could insult harder. It was about endurance. Because real conflicts aren't won in explosive moments. They're won in what happens after the explosion. T.I, as both a father and a veteran artist, had a dual role to navigate. Publicly, he supported his son. Privately, you can imagine the complexity. A father understands loyalty. A seasoned artist understands optics. When he released his diss track, it was a return to fundamentals. Bars over broadcasts. It reminded people that regardless of controversy, he's still a skilled lyricist. For a brief moment, the narrative shifted back toward music. But it didn't stay there long. Because in the digital era, attention cycles move fast. And the most viral moments weren't coming from the booth. They were coming from Instagram. Meanwhile, 50 maintained his signature approach. No emotional speeches, no visible anger, just selective reposts, subtle jabs, and continued business moves. And that's another layer people sometimes overlook. While the internet argued, 50 kept highlighting his ventures, appearances, and projects. It created a contrast. Chaos on one side, business as usual on the other. That contrast was strategic. It communicated something without saying it directly. I'm bigger than this. Whether that's objectively true isn't the point. Perception is what shapes public memory. And perception began tilting toward composure over confrontation. But here's where the story gets deeper. Because beneath the headlines and memes, there was a cultural conversation forming. Many observers began asking uncomfortable questions. Has social media erased the last boundaries of rap beef? Is there still a code? Once upon a time, diss records were calculated chess matches. They were crafted, layered, intentional. Yes, they were brutal. Yes, they were personal. But there was usually structure. Now the structure has dissolved. Live streams replace studios. Captions replace verses. AI edits replace video shoots. And reaction speed matters more than lyrical depth. King Harris represents a generation raised in that ecosystem. Immediate response feels natural. Silence feels like weakness. Emotional transparency is normal. 50 represents a generation that understands narrative timing. When to respond, when to let the opponent exhaust themselves, when to inject humor instead of anger. That generational collision was arguably more compelling than the insults themselves, because it exposed two completely different philosophies of power. One philosophy says, meet disrespect with louder disrespect. The other says, reduce your opponent publicly and never appear rattled. Throughout this saga, one thing became undeniable. Once family enters the arena, everything changes. When 50 posted Tiny's image, he didn't just poke at T.I, he triggered a protective instinct in a son. When King mentioned 50's late mother, he didn't just retaliate, he reopened a childhood wound that shaped 50's entire life story. These aren't light topics, and that's why the energy shifted from entertaining to uncomfortable. There's a reason many fans started expressing fatigue, Because when conflict moves from competitive to traumatic, the audience feels it. Another overlooked dimension is long-term impact. In the moment, viral moments feel powerful. But years later, what remains? Will this be remembered as a strategic masterclass in trolling? Or as an example of how quickly modern beef can spiral beyond control? For King Harris, this was a defining moment. Stepping into a public war with someone as seasoned as 50 Cent is high risk. It brings visibility, but it also invites scrutiny. For T.I, it reinforced his loyalty as a father, but it also dragged him into a narrative he may not have intended to escalate this far. For 50, it reaffirmed his reputation as someone who doesn't back down and doesn't fight emotionally. But even for him, the use of AI in personal conflicts sparked conversations about ethics and the future of digital warfare. Because that's what this became, not just a rap beef, digital warfare. And perhaps the most telling moment in all of this wasn't an insult. It was a statement 50 has made in the past about conflict. He once implied that when he feels disrespected deeply enough, he doesn't stop until he feels even. That mindset explains a lot. It explains why ignoring things isn't his style. It explains why escalation is part of his pattern. But it also reveals the danger. Because when two sides refuse to disengage, escalation has no ceiling. Eventually, someone has to decide the cycle ends. And by the final days of this clash, the intensity began slowing. Not because the issues were resolved, but because the shock value had peaked. The internet moved on to the next headline. That's the nature of digital storms. They rage fast, they burn bright, and then they fade. But for the individuals involved, the consequences linger longer than the trending tab. In the end, this entire saga started with one issue: respect. Respect questioned, respect challenged, respect defended. But what it revealed was bigger than respect. It revealed how fame, family, trauma, pride, and technology collide in the modern era. It showed how quickly music can become secondary, and it forced fans to confront an uncomfortable truth. In 2026, rap beef isn't just about bars, it's about branding. It's about psychology. It's about who controls the narrative. And sometimes it's about who can stay the calmest while the other side burns hottest. Because in the age of social media, the loudest voice doesn't always win. Sometimes the quietest smirk does. And that's what made this more than just another feud. It became a case study in modern conflict, where legacy meets live stream and strategy meets emotion. And once those worlds collide, there's no such thing as just rap anymore. If this breakdown made you look at this situation differently, that's the point. Because this wasn't just about 50 Cent, T.I, or King Harris going back and forth. This was about how rap beef has evolved. From studio diss tracks to live stream explosions, from lyrical warfare to psychological strategy, from music battles to narrative control. And if you really think about it, this might be one of the clearest examples of how conflict works in the social media era. Now I want to hear from you. Who handled this better? Was it calculated composure or emotional loyalty? Did lines get crossed on both sides, or was one move worse than the other? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have a real conversation about it. And if you want more deep dives like this, breaking down the psychology behind hip-hop's biggest moments, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown. Because the culture is always moving, and we're going to analyze every major moment, step by step.